Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of Window Rock, Arizona, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, deserts, and tribal lands are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Navajo Nation Police Department has documented incidents that defy conventional explanation, encounters that challenge our understanding of reality itself. These are not legends passed down through generations, but contemporary accounts from sworn officers who patrol the vast reservation lands. Window Rock serves as the capital of the Navajo Nation, where the distinctive rock formation stands as a natural monument. The Navajo Nation Police Department operates across 27,000 square miles of remote desert, canyons, and mesas, facing challenges unique to tribal law enforcement. The department has maintained detailed records since 1872, documenting everything from routine violations to encounters that continue to perplex even seasoned officers. The 7 cases we examine tonight span several decades, but share common threads. Each involves sworn officers who faced situations defying their training and experience. These accounts come from official reports, dispatch recordings, and interviews with officers involved. Each case remains officially unresolved, leaving as many questions as answers. Now, let us begin. With our first story, it was late October of 2012 when Officer Thomas Begay began his shift at 10 p.m. The temperature had dropped to 48 degrees as fall settled firmly into the high desert. Route 264 stretched east from Window Rock toward the New Mexico border, a lonely stretch of highway that cut through darkness, interrupted only by occasional ranch lights and the glow of distant communities. Begay had been with the Navajo Nation Police for 6 years, spending most of that time on night patrol. The quiet of the desert night was something he had grown accustomed to, a peaceful solitude that many of his colleagues found unsettling. That evening began like any other, a briefing at headquarters, a check of his patrol vehicle, and a cup of black coffee from the thermos he always brought from home. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio as she assigned him his sector for the night. The familiar rhythm of calls and responses that formed the soundtrack of his work. The first hours of his shift passed uneventfully. Begay patrolled the main streets of Window Rock before heading out onto the darker roads that connected the scattered communities of the reservation. The dashboard clock read 1:17 a.m. when he turned onto Route 264, heading east toward the small community of Ganado. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow center line and the occasional reflector marking the road's edge. The desert landscape on either side was barely visible, reduced to shadows against the slightly lighter sky. A thin crescent moon offered little illumination, and the stars spread across the clear night sky in brilliant display. Begay had driven this route hundreds of times, knowing every curve, every cattle guard, every landmark along the way. The patrol car's engine hummed steadily, the only sound in the vast emptiness surrounding him. At approximately 1:43 a.m., Begay noticed something ahead on the right side of the road. His headlights caught a figure standing near the edge of the pavement, facing away from his vehicle. As he drew closer, he could see it was a woman wearing what appeared to be traditional Navajo clothing, a long dark dress with silver ornaments that caught his headlights. Her hair was long and dark, falling past her waist. Begay slowed his vehicle, concerned that someone might be stranded or in trouble along this isolated stretch of highway. When he was about 50 yards away, he activated his spotlight to get a better look. The figure remained motionless as the bright beam illuminated her. Something about her posture struck Begay as unusual. She stood perfectly still, her arms at her sides, her face turned away from the road. Bigay radioed dispatch to report his location and the situation. Central, this is Unit 17. I have a pedestrian on Route 264, approximately mile marker 317. Female, appears to be Native American, standing on the shoulder. I'm stopping to check on her welfare. The dispatcher acknowledged his call and asked if he needed backup. Negative at this time, Bigay responded. Just a welfare check. He pulled his patrol car onto the shoulder, leaving about 20 feet between his vehicle and the figure. The spotlight remained trained on her as he opened his door and stepped out into the cool night air. The silence of the desert seemed to deepen, broken only by the low idle of his engine and the slight crunch of his boots on the gravel shoulder. "Ma'am?" Bigay called out. "Are you all right? Do you need assistance?" The figure did not respond or turn toward him. Bigay approached slowly, his hand resting near his sidearm out of habit rather than any sense of immediate danger. As he drew closer, perhaps 15 feet away, he noticed something that made him stop. The woman's feet appeared to be hovering slightly above the ground rather than standing on it. He blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the light or his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He took another step forward, and the realization struck him with cold certainty. Her feet were indeed not touching the ground. The traditional dress she wore seemed to fade into the darkness below her calves, with no visible feet or shoes. Bigay felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert temperature. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called out again, his voice tighter now. The figure remained motionless. He reached for his flashlight, switching it on and directing the beam toward her feet. The powerful light revealed nothing but empty space beneath her dress. The beam continued to the ground, where it should have illuminated shoes or feet. But there was only the cracked asphalt of the highway shoulder. Bigay took an involuntary step backward, his training momentarily forgotten in the face of something that defied explanation. The radio on his shoulder crackled with the dispatcher's voice, asking for an update on his welfare check. Bigay raised the radio to his mouth, his eyes never leaving the figure. "Central, this is Unit 17. I need you to run a check on any reported missing persons in the area. Female, traditional clothing, approximately." He trailed off as the figure began to turn slowly toward him. The movement was unnatural, smooth and fluid, without the slight shifts of weight that accompany human movement. As she turned, Bigay could see that her face was obscured by shadows, despite the spotlight and flashlight aimed in her direction. He could make out no features, only darkness where facial features should have been. The silver ornaments in her hair caught the light with an unnatural gleam, seeming to pulse with a light of their own. The dispatcher's voice came through the radio again. "Unit 17, we have no reports of missing persons matching that description. Do you require assistance?" Bigay found himself unable to respond immediately, transfixed by the figure before him. As he watched, the woman began to move toward the desert, away from the road. Her movement was gliding rather than walking, still making no contact with the ground. Bigay felt a profound sense of wrongness, a primal recognition that whatever he was witnessing did not belong in the natural world. His police training had prepared him for dangerous situations, for armed suspects and medical emergencies, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. "Central, this is Unit 17, he finally managed to say, his voice strained. "I need backup at my location, and I need you to check if anyone has reported any unusual activity in this area tonight." He knew how strange his request sounded, even as he said it. The dispatcher responded immediately. "Backup is en route, ETA 7 minutes. And Unit 17, what kind of unusual activity are you referring to?" Begay watched as the figure moved further into the desert, becoming more indistinct with each passing moment. "I'm not sure how to describe it," he said. "Just send the backup. And maybe ask the old ones if there's anything I should know about being out here tonight." The next 7 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Begay remained by his patrol car, his flashlight beam sweeping the area where the figure had disappeared. The desert night seemed to grow darker, the stars above dimming as if obscured by something unseen. He felt watched, a sensation he had experienced before during stakeouts and surveillance operations. But this was different, more primal, more unsettling. When the backup unit arrived, Officers Danny Yazzie and Maria Charlie found Begay standing by his car, his face pale beneath the patrol car's dome light. "Tommy, what's going on?" Yazzie asked as he approached. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Begay recounted what he had witnessed, his voice steady despite the lingering tremor in his hands. He pointed to the area where the figure had disappeared, noting that there were no footprints in the sandy soil despite the woman's movement through that area. Yazzie and Charlie exchanged glances, but did not dismiss his account. Both were Navajo and understood that some things in their culture were not easily explained by conventional means. The three officers searched the area with flashlights, finding nothing unusual, no footprints, no signs of recent passage, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. The incident report Begay filed later that night described the encounter in factual terms, carefully avoiding language that might suggest hallucination or embellishment. It concluded simply, "Subject observed standing on Route 264's shoulder at approximately 1:43 a.m. Subject disappeared into desert terrain without leaving tracks. Unable to determine identity or current whereabouts." The next morning, Begay spoke with an elder from the community about what he had witnessed. The elder listened patiently, nodding as Begay described the woman's appearance and strange movements. When Begay finished, the elder was silent for a long moment before speaking. "You were given a warning," the elder said. "Some nights are not meant for travel. Some places are not meant to be disturbed. Be grateful that you were shown respect and allowed to continue on your way." Begay never encountered the figure again during his years of service. But he never patrolled Route 264 at night without a sense of caution, a recognition that the desert held mysteries that his police training had never prepared him to face. The incident report remains in the Navajo Nation police files, officially categorized as unidentified person. But those familiar with the case understand that what Begay encountered that night was something that defied simple explanation. The dispatch center of the Navajo Nation Police Department in Window Rock operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, staffed by a small team of trained professionals who served as the vital link between officers in the field and the resources they needed. Sarah Mitchell had worked as a dispatcher for 3 years, following a decade with the Apache County Sheriff's Office. The transition had presented challenges, from learning the complex jurisdictional boundaries of tribal lands to understanding the cultural nuances that influence law enforcement on the reservation. Mitchell had proven herself capable and reliable, known for her calm demeanor during emergencies and her encyclopedic knowledge of the vast territory she helped patrol. The dispatch center itself was a modest room with 3 workstations, each equipped with multiple radio channels, a computer terminal, and direct lines to emergency services. It was during the graveyard shift on March 15, 2015, that Mitchell received a call that would remain with her for the rest of her life. The night had been relatively quiet, with only routine traffic stops and a domestic disturbance that had been resolved without incident. At 2:17 a.m., the main dispatch line rang, displaying an unfamiliar number that registered as coming from a satellite phone rather than a cellular or landline. "Navajo Nation Police Dispatch. "This is Sarah," she answered professionally. The response that came through the line was distorted, as if the caller was in an area with poor reception. "Help me," a voice said, breaking up with static. "I'm lost, need help." Mitchell immediately switched into emergency protocol mode, her fingers flying across the keyboard to log the call. "Sir or ma'am, can you hear me?" Mitchell asked, her voice calm and steady. "Can you tell me your location?" The static on the line seemed to worsen, making the caller's response difficult to understand. "Near the rocks, can't see. So dark." Mitchell could hear wind whistling in the background, along with what sounded like distant howling. "Are you in a vehicle?" she asked. "No. Walking. Fell hurt." The connection seemed to improve slightly, allowing Mitchell to hear the caller's voice more clearly. It was a man, young-sounding with an undercurrent of panic that he was trying to control. "Can you see any landmarks? Anything that might help me locate you?" Mitchell asked, already pulling up satellite maps of the area on her computer terminal. The caller's response was interrupted by a sudden burst of static, followed by what sounded like a strange clicking or chittering noise in the background. "Something's out here with me," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I can hear it moving around." Mitchell felt a chill despite the warm temperature in the dispatch center. "Sir, stay on the line with me. I'm trying to pinpoint your location. Can you describe what you hear?" The wind seemed to pick up on the caller's end, nearly drowning out his response. "Not human. The sound... Oh God, it's closer now." Mitchell could hear the fear in his voice, a primal terror that went beyond simple disorientation. "I need you to find shelter if possible," Mitchell instructed, simultaneously radioing Officer Benally, who was patrolling in the general area where she believed the call might be originating. "Is there anywhere you can take cover? A vehicle? A building? Anything?" The caller's breathing became more ragged. "No. Nothing. Just rocks and... His voice trailed off, replaced by the strange clicking sound that seemed to be getting closer. Mitchell could hear something else now. A low guttural sound that reminded her of a large animal, yet somehow different from any animal call she had ever heard. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay on the line," she said, her own heart rate increasing despite her years of training and experience. Officer Benally's voice came over the radio. "Central, this is Unit 23. I'm near the area you mentioned, but I don't see any vehicles or signs of anyone out here. Can you get a better location fix?" Mitchell was trying to triangulate the call using the satellite phone's signal, but the results were inconsistent, jumping between several locations across a wide area of desert terrain. "The signal is bouncing," she told Benally. "I'm getting multiple readings. Try heading toward the formation known as the Twin Arches. That seems to be the most consistent location." As Benally changed course, Mitchell returned her attention to the caller. "Sir, help is on the way. Can you tell me your name? Are you alone?" The response that came back was barely audible, distorted by what sounded like heavy breathing or panting. "John. My name is John. Was with friends. We got separated. They ran..." Mitchell's fingers flew across her keyboard as she logged the information. "John, stay with me. What happened to your friends? Why did they run?" The connection seemed to deteriorate further, the voice breaking up. "Saw something. In the rocks. Not human. Tall. Thin. Oh God, it's here. It's..." The line went dead. replaced by a dial tone that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet dispatch center. Mitchell stared at her phone for a moment before trying to call back, but the satellite phone would not accept incoming calls. "Unit 23, this is Central," Mitchell radioed Benali. "I've lost the connection with the caller. He said his name is John, and he was separated from his friends. They saw something in the rocks near the Twin Arches formation. The caller mentioned something tall and thin that wasn't human." Benali acknowledged the information and continued toward the formation, his spotlight cutting through the darkness as he searched for any sign of the caller or his companions. Mitchell began running checks for any reported missing persons or camping trips in the area, coming up empty. She also contacted the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Apache County Sheriff's Office to see if they had received any similar calls, but none had. 45 minutes later, Benali radioed back. "Central, this is Unit 23. I've searched the area around the Twin Arches thoroughly. No sign of anyone, no footprints, no recent campfires, no evidence that anyone has been here recently. The ground is undisturbed." Mitchell felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Nothing at all?" she asked. "Not a thing," Benali confirmed. "It's like no one's been out here in days. The wind has wiped the ground clean, but there should be some sign if someone was walking around here recently." Benali continued his search for another hour before being called to assist with a traffic accident on the other side of the reservation. The next morning, Mitchell filed a detailed report on the call, including the audio recording she had made of the conversation. The call log showed a duration of 7 minutes and 23 seconds. Originating from a satellite phone registered to an outdoor equipment rental company in Phoenix. When Mitchell contacted the company, they confirmed that the phone had been rented to a group of college students from Arizona State University who had planned a weekend camping trip in the desert. The company had not heard from the group since they picked up the equipment on Friday afternoon. Mitchell immediately forwarded this information to her supervisor, who initiated a search for the missing students. The search operation lasted 3 days, involving multiple agencies from across the region. Eventually, the students were found safe at a different campsite approximately 20 miles from where the call had originated. They explained that they had changed their plans at the last minute and had been unable to notify the rental company due to poor cell service. When questioned about the phone call, none of the students could explain it. They confirmed that all their equipment, including the satellite phone, had remained in their possession throughout the weekend. None of them had made any calls for help, and they had not been anywhere near the Twin Arches formation on the night in question. Mitchell listened to the recording of the call multiple times, trying to find some explanation for what had happened. The voice on the recording was clearly male and sounded genuinely terrified. The background noises, the wind, the strange clicking sounds, the guttural vocalizations could not be easily explained away. Technical experts examined the recording and found no evidence of tampering or manipulation. The satellite phone company confirmed that the call had indeed originated from their equipment, though they could not explain how it had been made if the student's account was accurate. The case remains officially unresolved, filed away in the Navajo Nation police archives as unidentified emergency call. Mitchell never forgot the terror in the caller's voice, or the feeling that something beyond her understanding had reached out through the phone that night. A cry for help from someone or something that had never existed in any conventional sense. The summer of 2018 brought unusually high temperatures to the Navajo Nation, with daytime highs regularly exceeding 105 degrees. The heat wave had lasted for 3 weeks by the time 12-year-old Jay Tso went missing on July 7th. The boy had been playing with friends near his home in the small community of Fort Defiance when he wandered off to explore a nearby arroyo. When he failed to return home by dusk, his parents reported him missing to the Navajo Nation police. Sergeant Mike Wilson, a 22-year veteran of the department, was assigned to coordinate the search operation. Wilson had conducted dozens of searches over the years for lost hikers, missing livestock, and occasionally children who had strayed from home. This case would prove to be unlike any other he had experienced. The search began at first light on July 8th, with Wilson organizing volunteers and coordinating with other agencies. The terrain around Fort Defiance was challenging. A labyrinth of dry washes, rock formations, and dense vegetation that could easily hide a small boy. Wilson established a command post at the community center, laying out maps and assigning search teams to grid sections. The temperature was already approaching 90 degrees by 8 a.m., with meteorologists predicting another day of extreme heat. Wilson briefed the volunteers, emphasizing safety protocols and the importance of staying hydrated. "We're looking for a 12-year-old Navajo boy, about 4'10", wearing a red t-shirt and blue jeans," Wilson told the assembled group. "He was last seen near the arroyo behind the community ball field. Let's bring him home safe." The first day of searching yielded no results. Teams combed the arroyo system and surrounding desert, finding footprints that matched Jay's description, but leading to no clear destination. As the temperature climbed past 100 degrees, Wilson made the decision to suspend the ground search until the following morning, maintaining only a minimal presence overnight. The boy's parents waited at the command post, their faces etched with worry as the hours passed without any sign of their son. Wilson spoke with them periodically, offering reassurance he wasn't entirely sure he believed. In his years with the department, he had seen missing children cases end both happily and tragically, and the first 48 hours were critical. As night fell over the desert, Wilson reviewed the day's search patterns, planning a more intensive effort for the following day. The second day brought more searchers, including volunteers from neighboring communities and officers from other jurisdictions. The search area was expanded based on the possibility that Jay had wandered further than initially believed. Wilson worked methodically, coordinating teams and documenting every potential clue. At approximately 11:30 a.m., one of the search teams radioed in a significant discovery. "Command, this is Team Delta. We found something in the northern section of Grid 4. Looks like a piece of red fabric caught on some brush." Wilson felt a surge of adrenaline. "Is it the boy's shirt?" he asked. "Negative," came the response. "It's a piece of fabric, but it doesn't look like it's from a shirt. More like a ribbon or sash. And there's something else here, some markings on the rocks that don't look natural." Wilson left the command post to investigate the discovery personally. The site was located in a narrow canyon, accessible only by a steep descent from the ridge above. As Wilson made his way down, he could see why the area hadn't been thoroughly searched on the first day. It was difficult terrain that would have been challenging for a child to navigate. The search team had found a strip of red cloth, approximately 2 inches wide and 3 feet long, tied to a branch of a juniper tree. Nearby, a series of symbols had been drawn on the rock face using what appeared to be a mixture of sand and some kind of dark pigment. Wilson photographed the symbols, recognizing them as similar to traditional Navajo protective markings, but not quite right, distorted in a way he couldn't quite identify. "This isn't something a kid would do," Wilson said to Officer Nez, who had accompanied him to the site. "And this red cloth, it looks ceremonial. Do you recognize these symbols?" Nez examined the markings closely, shaking his head slowly. "They're almost like the symbols my grandmother used to draw for protection. But something's off. The proportions are wrong, and some of these lines, they don't belong in any traditional designs I've ever seen." Wilson felt a sense of unease growing as he studied the scene more carefully. The symbols seemed to form a pattern that drew the eye inward, creating an illusion of depth on the flat rock surface. As he stared at them, Wilson experienced a moment of disorientation, as if the symbols were moving slightly. Wilson radioed the command post to request a cultural specialist to examine the markings. While waiting for the specialist to arrive, he and Nez continued searching the immediate area. They found more strips of red cloth tied to various bushes and rocks, all arranged in a pattern that seemed to encircle a small clearing at the base of the canyon. In the center of this clearing, the ground had been disturbed, as if something had been dug up and then replaced. Wilson knelt to examine the soil more closely, noticing that it appeared darker than the surrounding earth, as if it had been recently watered despite the arid conditions. As he touched the soil, he felt an unexpected coolness, as if the ground retained moisture that should have evaporated quickly in the desert heat. The cultural specialist, an elderly Navajo man named Hosteen Tso, arrived at the site in early afternoon. Wilson led him to the location of the symbols and red cloth. Tso examined the markings carefully, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he studied each symbol in turn. "These are not our symbols," Tso said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "They look like our symbols, but they are wrong. They are like a reflection in water, similar but distorted. This is not for protection. This is for calling." Wilson felt a chill despite the oppressive heat. "Calling what?" he asked. Tso looked around the canyon, his eyes scanning the rock formations above them. "Something that should not be called. Something that answers when it hears its name spoken in the right way." As Tso spoke, Wilson's radio crackled with a call from another search team. "Command, this is Team Bravo. We found something in Grid 7. Looks like more of those red cloth strips. And there are footprints here, small ones, like they might belong to the missing boy. But there's something else with them, other prints that don't look human." Wilson acknowledged the call and turned back to Tso. "What else should we be looking for?" he asked. Tso pointed to the symbols on the rock. "These are a map. They show where to go and what to do. Whoever made these was not trying to find the boy. They were using him as bait." Wilson felt his professional composure strained by the implications of Tso's words. "Bait for what?" he asked again. Tso's response was barely audible above the wind that had begun to whip through the canyon. "For the walkers between worlds." The search operation took on a new urgency after Tso's warning. Wilson reorganized the teams, focusing their efforts on the areas indicated by the distorted symbols. As afternoon faded into evening, they found more evidence of the strange ritual, additional red cloth strips, more symbol markings, and in several locations, small offerings of corn pollen and other traditional materials arranged in patterns that Tso identified as invitations. The non-human footprints mentioned by Team Bravo were discovered in multiple locations, described by those who found them as elongated and narrow, with what appeared to be 3 toes rather than 5. The prints always appeared alongside the smaller footprints that matched Tso's shoes, suggesting that the boy had been accompanied by whatever made the strange tracks. As darkness fell, Wilson made the difficult decision to continue the search overnight, using flashlights and portable lights to examine the increasingly bizarre evidence they were discovering. At approximately 9:30 p.m., a searcher radioed in with a shouted report. "We found him. We found the boy." Wilson rushed to the location, a small cave hidden behind a rock slide. Tso was sitting inside, apparently unharmed but disoriented. When Wilson approached him, the boy looked up with eyes that seemed not to recognize his surroundings. "Are you all right, Jay?" Wilson asked gently. The boy nodded slowly. "I was with the tall man," he said. "He showed me things. He said I could see my grandfather if I stayed with him." Wilson felt a chill run down his spine. "Where is this tall man now, Jay?" he asked. The boy looked around the cave as if noticing for the first time that they were alone. "He left when he heard you coming. He said he would come back for me another time." Jatso was reunited with his parents that night, apparently physically unharmed, but strangely changed. He spoke little of his experience, mentioning only the tall man who had guided him through the desert and shown him places between the rocks. Medical examinations found no injuries or signs of abuse, but noted that the boy's pupils were dilated to an unusual degree, a condition that persisted for several days. Wilson filed a detailed report on the case, including photographs of the symbols, the red cloth, and the strange footprints. The cultural specialist provided a written statement describing the markings as a corrupted form of traditional Navajo spiritual practices, possibly intended to open a doorway between worlds. The case was officially closed as a missing person located safe, but Wilson continued to investigate the strange elements of the case in his spare time. He never found a satisfactory explanation for the distorted symbols or the non-human footprints. Jatso's family moved away from Fort Defiance 6 months after the incident, seeking what they described as a fresh start in a different community. Wilson occasionally thought about the boy's description of the tall man and the promise that he would come back for me another time. The experience left Wilson with a new understanding of the desert he had patrolled for over 2 decades, a recognition that there were forces at work in the vast landscapes of the Navajo Nation that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional law enforcement and rational explanation. Officer Jessica Yazzie had been with the Navajo Nation Police for just over a year when she was assigned to the Chapter House Row beat in Window Rock. It was considered a relatively quiet assignment, primarily consisting of routine patrols and responding to occasional disturbances at the tribal government buildings that lined the street. Yazzie had grown up in the area and knew most of the residents by name, a familiarity that made her well-suited to community policing. The morning of November 3, 2019, began like any other autumn day in Window Rock clear skies, temperatures in the low 50s, and the distinctive scent of pinon smoke from wood stoves in the residential areas nearby. Yazzie began her shift at 6 a.m., reviewing the overnight reports before starting her patrol. The first indication that something unusual was happening came when Yazzie responded to a call about vandalism at the Tribal Archives building. The caller, the building's caretaker, had arrived at 7 a.m. to find that several windows had been broken during the night. When Yazzie arrived at the scene, she immediately noticed something strange about the damage. The windows had not been shattered by thrown rocks or bullets as she initially assumed, but appeared to have been pushed outward from inside the building, the glass fragments lying on the ground outside rather than inside. Even more puzzling were the marks left on the windowsills, a series of deep scratches that appeared to have been made by something with long, sharp claws rather than human hands or tools. Yazzie photographed the damage and collected evidence before interviewing the caretaker, an elderly man named Frank Nez, who had worked at the archives for over 20 years. "I've never seen anything like this," Nez told her, his voice trembling slightly. "The doors were still locked when I arrived, and the alarm didn't go off. It's like whatever did this was already inside when I locked up yesterday evening." Yazzie asked if anything unusual had been reported by the cleaning crew or other staff who had been in the building the previous day. Nez shook his head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Although..." He paused, seeming to consider whether to continue. "Although the lights in the basement kept turning on by themselves yesterday afternoon. I thought it was just a faulty switch." After completing her initial report, Yazzie decided to check the basement of the archives building, accessing it through the interior stairwell. The basement was used primarily for storage, with rows of metal shelving holding boxes of documents and artifacts that had not yet been cataloged. As Yazzie descended the stairs, She noticed that the air felt unusually cold and damp compared to the rest of the building. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. It was only when she reached the bottom of the stairs that she saw them a series of footprints in the thin layer of dust that covered the concrete floor. The footprints were unlike any Yazzie had ever seen. They were approximately 10 inches long, but only 3 inches wide, with what appeared to be 3 long toes rather than 5. The prints showed an unnaturally deep indentation, suggesting that whatever had made them was extremely heavy for its size. What disturbed Yazzie most was the pattern of the tracks. They didn't lead to or from any entrance or exit, but simply appeared in the middle of the basement floor, circled a particular storage shelf, and then disappeared as mysteriously as they had begun. Yazzie carefully photographed the footprints before calling for backup and a crime scene unit. While waiting for assistance to arrive, Yazzie examined the shelf that the footprints had circled. It contained boxes of materials related to traditional Navajo ceremonies and healing practices, items that had been collected from various communities over several decades. One box in particular appeared to have been disturbed, its lid partially open and some of its contents shifted. Yazzie donned gloves before carefully examining the contents, which included ceremonial masks, prayer feathers, and bundles of herbs wrapped in cloth. Nothing appeared to be missing, but several items had been moved from their original positions and arranged in a pattern that Yazzie couldn't immediately identify. When Sergeant Wilson arrived with the crime scene unit, Yazzie showed him the footprints and the disturbed storage shelf. Wilson, who had investigated numerous unusual cases during his years with the department, studied the tracks with a concerned expression. "I've seen prints like these before," he said quietly. "Up near Fort Defiance, during that search for the missing boy a couple of years ago. We never figured out what made them." Wilson examined the disturbed contents of the storage box, his frown deepening. "These items shouldn't be stored together like this," he said. "Some of these ceremonial objects are meant to be kept separate. Combining them like this, it's not right." The crime scene unit cast molds of the footprints and collected dust samples from around the tracks for analysis. Yazzie and Wilson continued their investigation of the archives building, finding more evidence of the strange intruder. In a small restroom in the basement, they discovered that the mirror had been removed from the wall and placed on the floor, where it appeared to have been used as a surface for arranging symbols drawn in what looked like a mixture of water and ash. The symbols were similar to those Wilson had encountered during the search for Jade So, distorted versions of traditional Navajo markings that seemed to create patterns of movement when viewed from certain angles. By mid-afternoon, the initial investigation had been completed, and Yazzie was preparing to file her report when she received a call about another incident just 2 blocks away. The Window Rock Tribal Museum was reporting similar damage to what had been discovered at the archives building. When Yazzie arrived at the museum, she found that several display cases containing ceremonial artifacts had been broken from the inside, with the same type of claw marks on the glass. The museum's director, Dr. Ellen Hayes, met Yazzie at the entrance with a worried expression. "I don't understand how this could have happened," Hayes said. "The security system didn't trigger any alarms, and there's no sign of forced entry anywhere." As Yazzie examined the damaged display cases, she noticed that the same 3-toed footprints she had seen in the archives basement were present here as well, appearing and disappearing without any apparent source or destination. The artifacts that had been disturbed were all related to traditional Navajo ceremonies involving healing and protection, similar to those found in the archives basement. In each case, the items had been rearranged rather than stolen, combined in ways that violated traditional protocols for handling sacred objects. Dr. Hayes explained the significance of the disturbed artifacts to Yazzie as they examined the damage. "These items represent different aspects of our traditional beliefs," she said. Some are meant to bring healing, others protection, others guidance. When they're combined improperly, they can create imbalances, spiritual disturbances that can manifest in physical ways. Yazi thought about the broken windows, the strange footprints, and the feeling of coldness in the archive's basement. "Do you think someone is trying to create some kind of ceremony?" she asked. Hayes shook her head slowly. A ceremony follows specific protocols, performed by someone with knowledge and training. This feels more like a child playing with things it doesn't understand, but with consequences that could be dangerous. The investigation continued throughout the week, with similar incidents reported at 3 other locations in Window Rock, the tribal library, a community center, and a private residence that housed a collection of ceremonial items. Each incident followed the same pattern. No sign of forced entry, damage from the inside rather than outside. The distinctive 3-toed footprints and ceremonial objects rearranged in ways that violated traditional protocols. The Navajo Nation Police Department consulted with tribal elders and spiritual leaders, who expressed concern that someone was deliberately attempting to disrupt the spiritual balance of the community. Yazi found herself increasingly disturbed by the case, not just because of its bizarre nature, but because of the growing sense of wrongness that seemed to permeate the affected locations. She began experiencing headaches when she spent time at the investigation sites, and on 2 occasions, she thought she saw a tall, thin figure moving at the edge of her vision, only to find nothing there when she turned to look directly. Wilson noticed the change in Yazi's demeanor and suggested she take some time off, but she refused, determined to see the case through to its conclusion. The break in the case came unexpectedly from a source no one had considered: a group of children who had been playing near the Tribal Council building on the afternoon of November 1st, 2 days before the first incident was reported. One of the children, an 8-year-old named Tyler Chi, told his mother that he and his friends had seen a shadow man near the building's basement entrance. The description matched what Yazi had thought she had seen: a tall, unnaturally thin figure that seemed to be made of darkness rather than solid matter. When questioned by Yazi, Tyler described how the figure had moved like smoke and had left footprints that looked like bird feet in the dirt. The children's account led investigators to examine the basement of the Tribal Council building, where they discovered evidence that someone had been living there temporarily. There were blankets, food wrappers, and a small collection of ceremonial items that appeared to have been taken from the various locations that had been vandalized. Most disturbing was a series of drawings on the walls, done in charcoal, that depicted strange hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, part something else entirely. The drawings showed these creatures moving between what appeared to be different worlds or dimensions, accompanied by symbols similar to those found at the other crime scenes. Despite this discovery, the case remained officially unresolved. No suspect was ever identified, and the person or persons responsible for the incidents were never located. The ceremonial items were returned to their proper places after being ritually cleansed by tribal spiritual leaders. The 3-toed footprints were analyzed by forensic experts, who concluded that they did not match any known human or animal species. Yazi eventually requested a transfer to a different beat, finding herself increasingly uncomfortable with the sense of being watched that persisted in the Chapter House Row area, even after the incident stopped. The case remains one of the strangest in the history of the Navajo Nation Police Department. A series of events that challenged conventional understanding and left those who investigated it with questions that continue to haunt them years later. Officer Daniel Chi had been with the Navajo Nation Police for 5 years, spending most of that time on patrol in the eastern districts of the reservation. The spring of 2020 had brought unusual weather patterns to the region, with sudden temperature drops and unseasonal storms that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Chi had noted these weather anomalies in his daily logs, not thinking much of them beyond the practical challenges they presented to his patrol duties. The evening of April 17th, 2020, began with clear skies and mild temperatures, but Chi had learned to expect sudden changes in the desert climate. He started his shift at 6 p.m., checking his patrol vehicle, a 2018 Ford Explorer, equipped with standard police package modifications, before heading out to begin his rounds. Chi's patrol area that night covered the remote eastern section of the reservation, a vast expanse of desert, canyons, and mesas with only scattered communities and isolated ranches. The first few hours of his shift passed uneventfully, with only a couple of traffic stops and a wellness check on an elderly resident who lived alone. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Chi received a call from dispatch about a possible trespassing complaint at an abandoned uranium mine near the community of Coyote Canyon. The mine had been closed for decades, but occasionally attracted unauthorized visitors, despite the dangers posed by radiation and structural instability. As Chi drove toward the mine, he noticed that the temperature seemed to be dropping more rapidly than the weather forecast had predicted. The patrol car's external temperature display showed 58 degrees, down from 72 degrees just an hour earlier. The sky, which had been clear when he began his shift, was now filling with dark clouds that seemed to be moving in an unusual pattern, swirling rather than drifting, as clouds normally did. Chi radioed dispatch to report the changing weather conditions, noting that the wind had picked up significantly and was blowing in gusts that rocked his vehicle despite its weight. The turnoff to the abandoned mine was marked only by a weathered sign and a dirt road that was barely visible in the darkness. Chi turned onto the road, reducing his speed as the vehicle's headlights revealed deep ruts and rocks that could damage the tires or undercarriage. The dirt road wound through a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side and blocking much of the already limited light from the sky. As Chi proceeded deeper into the canyon, he noticed that his vehicle's electrical system began to malfunction erratically. The headlights flickered intermittently, the radio emitted bursts of static, and the dashboard lights dimmed and brightened without pattern. Chi pulled over to the side of the road, thinking that the alternator might be failing. When he attempted to radio dispatch to report his situation, he discovered that his radio was not functioning at all, emitting only a low hum rather than the usual crackle of an open channel. His cell phone showed no signal, which was not unusual in this remote area, but still concerning given his situation. Chi decided to continue to the mine on foot, locking the patrol car and taking his flashlight and sidearm with him. The wind had intensified, howling through the canyon with a sound that seemed almost vocal, rising and falling in patterns that suggested something more than natural air currents. The abandoned mine appeared suddenly as Chi rounded a bend in the canyon road. The main entrance was a dark opening in the rock face, surrounded by deteriorating infrastructure from its operational days. As Chi approached with his flashlight, he noticed that the mine entrance appeared to be emanating a faint bluish light, despite the fact that the mine should have been completely dark. The light seemed to pulse slowly, growing brighter and then dimming in a rhythmic pattern that reminded Chi of breathing. As he drew closer, he could hear a low humming sound coming from within the mine, a frequency that seemed to resonate in his teeth and bones. Chi called out, identifying himself as a police officer and announcing his presence. The only response was an increase in the humming sound, which now seemed to have a melodic quality despite its low frequency. Chi carefully entered the mine, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and revealing tunnels that branched off in multiple directions. The bluish light appeared to be coming from deeper within the mine, drawing him forward despite his training and instincts that warned against entering an abandoned mine alone, especially at night. As Chi proceeded deeper into the mine, he noticed that the air temperature was dropping rapidly, his breath now visible in the beam of his flashlight. The walls of the tunnel began to show strange mineral deposits that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating patches of absolute darkness that even his powerful flashlight could not penetrate. The humming sound continued, now accompanied by what sounded like distant voices speaking in a language Chi didn't recognize, though the words seemed to form patterns that almost made sense before dissolving into meaningless sounds. Approximately 100 yards into the mine, Chi entered a large chamber where the bluish light originated. The source of the light appeared to be a crystalline formation embedded in the rock walls, pulsing with the rhythmic pattern he had observed from outside. The chamber contained unusual rock formations that seemed almost sculptural, arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate design rather than natural formation. As Chi examined the chamber more closely, he noticed movement in the periphery of his vision shadows that seemed to detach themselves from the darkness and move independently before reabsorbing into the surrounding blackness. Chi felt a sudden sense of danger that went beyond the rational risks of exploring an abandoned mine. The humming sound intensified, and the crystalline formations began to pulse more rapidly, the bluish light growing brighter until it was difficult to look at directly. The voices in the distance became clearer, though still in a language Chi couldn't understand. He decided to retreat from the mine, recognizing that whatever was happening here was beyond his ability to handle alone. As he turned to leave, he noticed that the entrance to the chamber seemed to have moved, now further away than it had been when he entered. The journey back through the mine tunnels became increasingly disorienting. The passages seemed to shift and change as Chi moved through them, branching and reconnecting in ways that defied the logical geography of the mine. The crystalline light from the chamber continued to illuminate the tunnels, casting shadows that moved with unnatural independence. Chi found himself walking in circles despite his efforts to maintain a straight course, the compass on his watch spinning uselessly. The voices now seemed to be all around him, speaking in urgent tones that conveyed meaning despite the incomprehensibility of the words themselves. After what seemed like hours but could only have been minutes, Chi finally emerged from the mine entrance, stumbling into the canyon night. The wind had died down, and the sky was now clear, filled with stars that seemed brighter than he had ever seen them. The temperature had risen again to a more normal level for the season. Chi made his way back to his patrol car, relieved to see it still parked where he had left it. When he tried to start the vehicle, however, he discovered that the engine would not turn over, making only a clicking sound when he turned the key. Chi attempted to call dispatch on his radio, finding that it was now functioning normally. He reported his situation and location, requesting a tow truck for his vehicle. While waiting for assistance, he examined the patrol car more closely, discovering that all electronic systems had been affected: the onboard computer, the emergency lights, even the digital clock on the dashboard. When the tow truck arrived an hour later, the driver examined the vehicle's electrical system, finding that the battery was completely drained despite being relatively new. More puzzling were the burn marks on several electronic components, suggesting that they had been subjected to a power surge far beyond what the vehicle's system should have been capable of producing. The next day, Chi returned to the abandoned mine with a team of investigators. The entrance appeared exactly as it had the previous night, but when they entered the mine, they found no evidence of the crystalline formations or the large chamber Chi described. The tunnels extended only a short distance before becoming impassable due to cave-ins, with no sign of the deeper passages Chi had navigated. The bluish light, the humming sound, and the voices he had heard were nowhere to be found. The only unusual discovery was a series of symbols drawn on the rock walls near the entrance, similar to those found in other unexplained cases across the reservation. Chi's patrol vehicle was taken to the department's maintenance facility, where mechanics discovered that the damage to the electrical system was unlike anything they had seen before. Several components had melted in ways that suggested exposure to extremely high temperatures. Yet there was no corresponding damage to surrounding materials. The vehicle's onboard computer had been completely wiped, its memory erased in a way that could not be explained by normal power surges or battery failure. The maintenance report concluded that the damage was inconsistent with known electrical or mechanical failure modes. Chi filed a detailed report on his experience at the abandoned mine, including descriptions of the crystalline formations, the unusual light and sound phenomena, and the geometric impossibilities of the mine's interior structure. The report was filed as equipment malfunction and possible trespassing at abandoned mine, with a note that further investigation of mine interior recommended when conditions permit. Chi never returned to the mine, requesting a transfer to a different patrol area shortly after the incident. He occasionally experienced headaches and episodes of disorientation in the months following the encounter, symptoms that gradually diminished but never entirely disappeared. The case remains officially unresolved, with no explanation for the damage to Chi's patrol vehicle or the phenomena he experienced inside the mine. The abandoned uranium mine was sealed off permanently 6 months after the incident, following a recommendation from the Tribal Environmental Agency that cited unusual radiation readings and structural instability as reasons for the closure. Chi's report remains in the Navajo Nation Police archives, a detailed account of an experience that challenges conventional understanding and suggests that the desert landscape holds mysteries that exist beyond the boundaries of normal human perception. Officer Rebecca Tallbear had graduated from the police academy just 3 weeks before her first unusual encounter on the Navajo Nation. At 24 years old, she was one of the youngest officers on the force, eager to prove herself despite her limited experience. Tallbear had grown up in Phoenix, but felt a strong connection to her Navajo heritage, which had influenced her decision to apply to the Navajo Nation Police Department. Her field training officer, Sergeant Mike Wilson, had been with the department for over 20 years and had seen more unusual cases than most officers encountered in an entire career. Wilson took his role as a mentor seriously, preparing Tallbear for the unique challenges of law enforcement on the reservation. The evening of June 12, 2021, was Tallbear's first night patrol without direct supervision. Wilson had signed off on her ability to handle solo duty after 2 weeks of accompanying her on various calls and patrols. Her assigned sector covered the area between Window Rock and the Arizona-New Mexico border, a region that included both populated communities and vast stretches of uninhabited desert. The weather was mild, with temperatures in the low 70s and a light breeze from the west. Tallbear began her shift with a thorough check of her patrol vehicle and equipment, following the procedures Wilson had drilled into her during training. The first hours of Tallbear's shift passed uneventfully, consisting primarily of traffic enforcement and a response to a minor disturbance at a local residence. At approximately 11:30 p.m., she received a call from dispatch about a report of strange lights in the desert near the community of Nahadadzil. The caller, an elderly woman named Alice Begay, reported seeing dancing lights in the direction of an old cemetery that had fallen into disuse. Similar reports had been received from 2 other residents in the area. Tallbear was familiar with the cemetery from her training with Wilson, who had mentioned that it was a location that sometimes attracted unusual activity. As Tallbear drove toward the location, she reviewed what she knew about the Nahadadzil cemetery. It had been established in the early 1900s, but had not been used for burials since the 1940s, when a new cemetery was established closer to the community center. The old cemetery consisted of approximately 20 graves, most marked only with simple wooden headstones that had weathered to near illegibility. The site was surrounded by a low stone wall that had partially collapsed in several places. Wilson had warned Tallbear that the cemetery was considered by many in the community to be a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a place where spirits sometimes lingered. When Tallbear arrived at the location, she parked her patrol vehicle on the dirt road that ran past the cemetery entrance. The night was dark, with only a thin crescent moon to provide illumination. Tallbear could see the cemetery clearly in the beam of her spotlight, the weathered headstones casting long shadows across the overgrown ground. She didn't immediately see any unusual lights, but as she watched, she noticed a faint, pulsing glow that seemed to emanate from the center of the cemetery. The light was pale blue in color, similar to the glow of a fluorescent lamp, but it appeared to move in a way that suggested something other than artificial lighting. Tallbear radioed dispatch to report her arrival and the presence of the unusual light. Central, this is Unit 34. I'm at the Navajo Cemetery. I can confirm unusual light activity, pale blue in color, appears to be originating from the central area of the cemetery. No visible source. Requesting permission to investigate on foot. The dispatcher's response came back immediately. Unit 34, you're cleared to investigate. Use caution and maintain radio contact. Tallbear acknowledged the instruction, taking her flashlight and sidearm before exiting the vehicle. As Tallbear approached the cemetery entrance, she noticed that the air felt unusually cold and still compared to the surrounding desert. The pale blue light seemed to intensify as she drew closer, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded her of a slow heartbeat. The gate to the cemetery, a simple wooden structure that hung crookedly on rusted hinges, stood partially open. Tallbear pushed it further open, the hinges groaning in protest as she entered the cemetery grounds. The interior of the cemetery was overgrown with native grasses and desert shrubs that had grown unchecked for decades. The pale blue light seemed to float approximately 3 feet above the ground near the center of the cemetery, moving slowly in a circular pattern. As Tallbear watched, the light began to change shape, elongating and then contracting as if it were breathing. She could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from the light itself, a frequency that resonated in her chest and made her teeth ache slightly. Tallbear advanced cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and revealing the weathered headstones and the crumbling stone wall that surrounded the cemetery. The ground was uneven, with several depressions that suggested graves that had settled over time. As she drew closer to the source of the light, she noticed that the humming sound was accompanied by what sounded like faint voices speaking in Navajo, though the words were distorted and difficult to understand, despite her familiarity with the language. The light suddenly darted to the side, moving with impossible speed and agility before resuming its slow, circular pattern. Tallbear felt a surge of adrenaline, but forced herself to remain calm, remembering Wilson's advice about maintaining composure in unusual situations. This is Unit 34, she radioed, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. The light is moving in a pattern that doesn't appear to be natural. No visible source or explanation. The humming sound has intensified, and I'm hearing what sounds like voices in Navajo. As Tallbear spoke, the light suddenly changed color, shifting from pale blue to a deep red that seemed to absorb the surrounding darkness. The humming sound increased in volume, and the voices became clearer, though still speaking words that Tallbear couldn't quite understand. The light began to move toward her, stopping approximately 10 feet away. Tallbear stood her ground, her training taking over as she assessed the situation for potential threats. The light hovered in place, pulsing slowly, and Tallbear had the distinct impression that it was observing her, studying her in the same way she was studying it. The light suddenly fragmented into multiple smaller lights that moved in different directions before reconverging into a single orb. As they merged, Tall Bear thought she could see figures within the light, human shapes that appeared and disappeared, like reflections on water. The humming sound now had a melodic quality, and the voices seemed to be speaking directly to her, though the words remained just beyond comprehension. Tall Bear felt a strange sensation, as if a current of electricity was passing through her body, raising the hairs on her arms and the back of her neck. Tall Bear decided to retreat from the cemetery, recognizing that she was dealing with something beyond her training and experience. As she backed away slowly, the light followed her, maintaining the same distance between them. The voices seemed to grow more urgent, and Tall Bear thought she could distinguish individual words now. Listen. Remember. Warning. She continued to back away until she reached the cemetery gate, then turned and walked quickly to her patrol vehicle. Once inside the vehicle, Tall Bear locked the doors and radioed dispatch for assistance. Central, this is Unit 34. I'm returning to my vehicle. The light followed me to the cemetery entrance. I need backup at this location. Also, please contact Sergeant Wilson and ask him to meet me here. The dispatcher acknowledged the call, and backup was dispatched immediately. Tall Bear watched in her rearview mirror as the light hovered near the cemetery gate, pulsing slowly in its deep red color. After approximately 5 minutes, it suddenly shot straight up into the sky and disappeared without a trace. Wilson arrived at the location shortly after the backup units, finding Tall Bear sitting in her patrol vehicle with the engine running. He approached cautiously, recognizing that she might be shaken by her experience. "What did you see, Rebecca?" he asked gently. Tall Bear took a deep breath before describing the encounter in detail, her voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. Wilson listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned as she spoke. When she finished, he was silent for a moment before speaking. "You saw the cemetery lights," he said. "I was hoping you wouldn't encounter them on your first solo patrol." Wilson explained that the lights had been reported intermittently for decades, with most experienced officers choosing to observe from a distance rather than approach directly. "The old stories say they're the spirits of those who weren't properly buried," Wilson told Tall Bear. "Or sometimes they're described as messengers, trying to communicate something important to the living. Most officers who've encountered them report hearing voices, usually in Navajo, though few can make out what they're saying." He looked at Tall Bear with concern. "What did you hear?" Tall Bear thought for a moment before answering. At first, the words were jumbled, like a radio tuned between stations. But as the light got closer, I thought I could make out a few words. "Listen, remember, and warning." They were repeated several times. Wilson nodded slowly. "Those are the same words others have reported hearing. No one's ever figured out exactly what we're supposed to listen to, remember, or be warned about." He placed a hand on Tall Bear's shoulder. "You handled this well, Rebecca. Better than most rookies would have." The next day, Wilson filed a report on the incident, documenting Tall Bear's encounter with the cemetery lights in detail. The report was added to a growing file of similar encounters stretching back several decades. Tall Bear accompanied Wilson to speak with Alice Begay, the original caller, who confirmed that the lights she had seen matched Tall Bear's description. Begay also mentioned that her grandmother had told her stories about the lights, describing them as the restless ones who carry messages between worlds. Tall Bear continued to patrol the same area for the remainder of her training period, occasionally driving past the old cemetery, but never approaching it after dark. She never saw the lights again during her patrols, though she sometimes thought she could hear faint humming when she passed the area, even during daylight hours. The experience left her with a new understanding of the complexity of law enforcement on the Navajo Nation. A recognition that her role sometimes required her to navigate phenomena that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional police work. Years later, after becoming a field training officer herself, Tallbear would occasionally tell the story of her encounter with the cemetery lights to the rookies she supervised. She would conclude the story with the same advice Wilson had given her. Not everything we encounter on this job can be explained by police procedure or rational investigation. Sometimes, the best we can do is observe, document, and respect that there are mysteries in this land that are older and more complex than our understanding of them. The cemetery lights continue to appear intermittently, a recurring phenomenon that remains officially unexplained, but widely accepted as part of the complex tapestry of life and death on the Navajo Nation. Detective Raymond Begay had been with the Navajo Nation Police Criminal Investigations Division for 15 years, specializing in cold cases that had remained unresolved despite the best efforts of previous investigators. The case file labeled 97042 had been sitting on his desk for 3 months, a persistent reminder of a mystery that had challenged the department for over 2 decades. The case involved the disappearance of 32-year-old medicine man Samuel Tso, who had vanished without a trace on the night of October 31st, 1997. Tso had been a respected member of the community, known for his knowledge of traditional healing ceremonies and his willingness to help those in need. His disappearance had left the community with unanswered questions and a sense of unfinished business that lingered years after the official investigation had been closed due to lack of evidence. The original case file was thin, containing only the initial missing person report, a few witness statements, and the results of a search operation that had yielded no significant clues. Tso had last been seen leaving his home in the late afternoon of October 31st. Telling his wife that he needed to perform a ceremony at a remote location in the Carrizo Mountains. He had taken his truck, a collection of ceremonial items, and enough food and water for several days. When he failed to return by November 5th, his wife reported him missing. The subsequent search operation had covered hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain, finding no sign of Tso, his truck, or the ceremonial items he had taken with him. The case had eventually been classified as missing, presumed deceased, though no body had ever been found. Begay had reopened the case at the request of Tso's family, who had recently received information they believed might be relevant to his disappearance. The information had come from an elderly woman who claimed to have had a vision about Tso's fate. While such visions were not typically considered admissible evidence in criminal investigations, Begay understood the importance of respecting traditional beliefs and practices, especially when dealing with cases involving respected community members like Tso. He had agreed to review the case file and follow up on any leads that might emerge from the woman's vision. The vision, as described by the woman named Mary Benally, was both specific and enigmatic. Benally claimed that Tso had been performing a ceremony to close a doorway between worlds that had been opened by someone practicing forbidden rituals. According to her vision, Tso had succeeded in closing the doorway, but had been pulled through it in the process, trapping him in a place that existed outside normal time and space. Benally described seeing Tso in a landscape that resembled the Carrizo Mountains, but was somehow different, with colors that were too vivid and rock formations that seemed to shift and change when not observed directly. She also mentioned that Tso was trying to communicate a warning, though the specific content of the warning was unclear. Begay listened to Benally's account with professional skepticism tempered by cultural respect. He had encountered similar visions and traditional knowledge in other cases, sometimes finding that they contained elements of truth that conventional investigation methods had missed. After Benally finished speaking, Begay asked if she knew of any specific location in the Carrizo Mountains where Tso might have been performing the ceremony. Benelli thought for a moment before describing a remote canyon known as Hastian Ghost Canyon, a place that traditional knowledge identified as a location where the veil between worlds was particularly thin. Begay decided to visit the location Benelli had described, taking with him Officer Jessica Yazzie, who had experience with unusual cases and was familiar with the Carrizo Mountains area. The two officers set out early on the morning of July 15, 2021, driving as far as they could before continuing on foot into the rugged terrain. The canyon was difficult to access, requiring a steep descent through loose scree and thick vegetation. As they entered the canyon, both officers noticed that the air felt unusually still and cold compared to the surrounding area. Yazzie commented on the silence, noting the absence of the usual sounds of birds and insects that were typically present even in remote areas. Approximately half a mile into the canyon, they discovered evidence that someone had been there recently. A small clearing had been created, with rocks arranged in a specific pattern that Begay recognized as a ceremonial layout. In the center of the clearing was a circle of ash that appeared to be from a recent fire, though the surrounding vegetation showed no signs of heat damage. Yazzie examined the area more closely, discovering several items that appeared to be ceremonial objects: prayer feathers, bundles of herbs, and small carved stones arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate design rather than random placement. As Begay photographed the ceremonial site, Yazzie discovered something partially buried in the ash at the center of the clearing. Using gloves, she carefully excavated the object, revealing a small leather pouch that appeared to be a medicine bundle, similar to those used by traditional healers. The pouch was tied with a leather cord that had been knotted in a specific pattern that Begay recognized as a closure method used only by certain medicine men for particularly powerful ceremonies. When Yazzie carefully opened the pouch, they found several items inside, including a small crystal, herbs that had been dried and ground into a powder, and a folded piece of paper that appeared to be a page torn from a notebook. The note, written in a careful hand that appeared to be Tso's, contained only a few words. "The door is closed, but I am caught between. The walkers are angry. They will try again. Beware the one who learns their names." The message was dated November 1st, 1997, the day after Tso had been reported missing. Begay and Yazzie exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of the discovery. The note provided the first concrete evidence that Tso had been in the canyon on the night he disappeared, and it suggested that his disappearance was related to some kind of spiritual conflict, rather than a random accident or crime. The officers continued their search of the canyon, finding more evidence of Tso's presence. They discovered his truck hidden in a narrow side canyon, covered with branches and brush in a way that suggested it had been deliberately concealed. The vehicle was intact, with a full tank of gas and no signs of mechanical failure. Inside the truck, they found Tso's ceremonial items, all carefully wrapped and stored, as if he intended to return for them. The only thing missing was a specific ceremonial mask that Begay knew was used in ceremonies related to spiritual protection and the closing of doorways between worlds. As the afternoon progressed, Begay and Yazzie began to experience unusual phenomena in the canyon. The shadows seemed to move independently of the sun's position, creating patterns that didn't match the natural geometry of the landscape. Both officers occasionally heard what sounded like whispering in Navajo, though the words were indistinct and seemed to come from multiple directions at once. At one point, Yazzie thought she saw a tall, thin figure standing on a ridge above them. But when she pointed it out to Begay, there was nothing there. The most disturbing discovery came late in the afternoon, when Yazzie found a series of symbols carved into the rock face at the back of the ceremonial clearing. The symbols were similar to traditional Navajo spiritual markings, but distorted in ways that made them seem wrong, as if they were reflections of authentic symbols viewed through a distorted lens. Bigay recognized the symbols from other unusual cases he had investigated, including the search for Jade So and the vandalism incidents at the tribal archives. The presence of these symbols suggested that So's disappearance was connected to a larger pattern of spiritual disturbances that had occurred across the reservation over several decades. As Bigay and Yazi prepared to leave the canyon, they experienced one final phenomenon that defied easy explanation. The air around them suddenly grew cold, and the light took on a strange quality, becoming somehow both brighter and dimmer at the same time. Both officers heard a clear voice speaking in Navajo saying, "Thank you for finding me. Now I can rest. But be careful, they will try again." The voice seemed to come from all directions at once, and when it finished, the air returned to normal temperature and the light resumed its natural quality. Bigay and Yazi reported their findings to the department, including the discovery of So's truck, the medicine bundle, the note, and the unusual symbols. The case was officially reclassified from missing presumed deceased to evidence of spiritual disturbance, a category that the department used for cases that involved phenomena beyond conventional explanation. So's family was informed of the discoveries, and a traditional ceremony was performed to help his spirit find peace and to close the doorway that he had apparently sealed at the cost of his own freedom. The case of Samuel Tso's disappearance remains officially unresolved in conventional terms, but the discovery of the ceremonial site and the note provided a form of closure for his family and the community. Bigay continued to investigate the connection between Tso's case and other unusual incidents across the reservation, recognizing that they might all be related to attempts by unknown entities to cross from their world into ours. The distorted symbols found in the canyon appeared in several other cases over the following years, suggesting that whatever Tso had been trying to prevent was still ongoing, requiring vigilance from those who understood the true nature of the threat. Bigay occasionally returned to Hasty and Ghost Canyon, finding that the ceremonial site remained undisturbed, but that the area continued to feel different from the surrounding landscape, quieter, colder, and somehow watchful. He never saw or heard anything unusual during these visits, but he always left with the sense that something was observing him from just beyond the edge of perception. The case file labeled 97042 remained on his desk, a reminder that some mysteries could be partially solved but never fully resolved. Existing in the space between rational investigation and traditional knowledge, between the world we understand and the one that remains just beyond our reach. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly across the Navajo Nation, where ancient traditions intersect with modern law enforcement. The 7 cases we've examined tonight represent only a fraction of the unusual encounters documented by the Navajo Nation Police Department over several decades. Each account challenges our conventional understanding of reality, suggesting that the desert landscape holds mysteries that exist beyond the boundaries of normal human perception. What these stories share is not just the element of the unexplained, but the professional integrity of the officers who encountered these phenomena and had the courage to document them despite the potential for skepticism or ridicule. The desert night has long been associated with strange phenomena across cultures, but for the Navajo Nation Police, these encounters are not folklore. They are documented events that occurred during routine patrols and investigations. The officers involved in these cases approached each situation with the same professionalism and commitment to duty that they applied to more conventional law enforcement activities. Their detailed reports and willingness to share their experiences provide valuable documentation of phenomena that might otherwise have been dismissed or forgotten. These accounts serve as a reminder that even in our modern, scientific age, There are aspects of reality that continue to defy easy explanation. What connects these seemingly disparate incidents is not just their location within the Navajo Nation, but the recurring elements that appear across multiple cases: the distorted symbols, the three-toed footprints, the figures that seem to exist between worlds, the voices that speak in languages just beyond comprehension. These recurring elements suggest that we may be witnessing manifestations of the same underlying phenomena, different expressions of something that exists at the intersection of traditional knowledge and modern experience. The Navajo concept of Hoju balance and harmony provides a framework for understanding these encounters not as random paranormal events, but as potential disturbances in the delicate equilibrium between worlds. The Navajo Nation Police Department occupies a unique position at the crossroads of two worlds: the modern justice system and traditional Navajo beliefs about the nature of reality and the relationship between the seen and unseen. This dual perspective allows officers to approach unusual encounters with both professional skepticism and cultural respect. Recognizing that some phenomena may require explanations that go beyond conventional police procedures. The cases we've examined tonight demonstrate how this balanced approach can provide insights that might be missed by either purely rational or purely spiritual perspectives alone. Silence permeates these stories as much as the unexplained phenomena themselves: the silence of the desert night, the silence of missing voices, the silence that follows encounters that defy language. Yet within this silence, there are lessons about humility, respect for the unknown, and the importance of maintaining balance in a world that contains more mysteries than certainties. The officers who shared these experiences did so not to provide answers, but to document questions, creating a record of encounters that continue to resonate long after the initial events have passed. Memory plays a crucial role in these accounts. Both the personal memories of the officers who experienced these phenomena and the collective memory of a community that understands the desert landscape as a living entity with its own rules and inhabitants. Traditional Navajo knowledge teaches that certain places serve as doorways between worlds, locations where the veil between realities is thin, and where encounters with beings from other realms are more likely to occur. The cases we've examined tonight all involve such locations: cemeteries, abandoned mines, remote canyons, lonely highways, places that exist at the margins of human activity and at the center of spiritual significance. The absence of easy answers in these cases is not a failure of investigation, but a recognition of the limits of conventional understanding. What these stories offer is not resolution, but possibility. The possibility that reality is more complex and mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. That there are forces at work in the world that operate according to principles we have yet to discover. The Navajo Nation police officers who documented these encounters understood that their role sometimes required them to bear witness to phenomena beyond explanation, creating a record that future generations might be better equipped to understand. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences helps create a more complete picture of the unexplained phenomena that occur across the American landscape, contributing to a collective understanding that transcends individual encounters. Your stories, like those of the Navajo Nation police officers we've heard tonight, become part of a larger narrative about the mysterious and sometimes unsettling nature of reality, in places where the veil between worlds grows thin. Thank you for watching Sleepless Campfire. Until next time, stay safe out there.